Dr. Rudy Schinken reminded us several months ago that any Swede lives longer in Minnesota than he does in Sweden, and he has the facts to prove that. It seems that everybody has a plan to tell me and this group how we should practice medicine, when, where, how, etc. And if they think that we are not selfish about this, they are stupid indeed. I am very selfish as far as my freedom is concerned, and I intend to not just sit on my duster and try to hold the fort, but I will not be content until I regain those freedoms that have been taken from me. We all remember that medicine is under attack, and not just because medicine is under attack. Medicine under attack is only one of the facets of our lives that has to be controlled before we have a complete socialistic state. And the word socialism now doesn't smell as bad or leave as bad a connotation in the minds of most people as it once did. But to me, it's worse than living by the fertilizer factory. I don't believe I could ever become accustomed to living by the fertilizer factory. It all gets worse as far as I'm concerned. We have forgotten that you cannot nationalize, socialize, or communize any segment of our economy without the entire country suffering, then slipping into mediocrity and then falling down into oblivion. Dr. Moorhead has brought us up to date. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Leithart now to tell you some of the present proposals. Dr. Leithart.
Thank you, Dr. Doherty. Certainly a pleasure to be part of this wonderful rally. Dr. Doherty neglected to inform you that I have recently specialized. I now confine my practice to the care of disturbed people, the parents of teenagers. I've been making a study of teenage problems. I've discovered that the ancient Romans were quite severe with their teenagers. They very strict. Matter of fact, they insisted that the youngsters be home every night by 11 o'clock after each orgy. Doctors like to talk about their various interesting cases, and I had one a while back that I especially enjoyed. She was a rather unusual little girl. Matter of fact, she was very little. She was a midget. She walked in, and I had to look over the desk to find her, and I said, "What can I do for you?" And she says, "Doctor, I have this horrible, horrible pain." And I said, "Well, we'll examine you." She said, "Well, I don't have it today." And I said, "Well, next time you get it, you come back." And she says, "Well, my problem is it always comes when it rains." And I said, "Well, that's fine. The next time it rains, you come in and see me." So several weeks later, she came in, and it was raining outside, and she says, "I've got that pain." I said, "Fine, the nurse will help you up on the table." And the nurse boosted her up. I said, "Nurse, would you prepare her?" So we got her ready, and I said, "Nurse, scissors," and I began to cut, and I cut away, and I said, we helped her down. I said, "Would you walk back and forth, see how it is now?" She says, it's fine. She said, it's completely gone. "Doctor, what did you cut off of me?" I said, 4 inches off the top of your goulashes. We have all kinds of cases. The various proposals that are before Congress now and suggested in the way of national health insurance are excellent examples of how America is being witched. I think we're being witched in many ways. In this case, which type of socialized medicine do you want? We're given only those choices. This is happening in everything all across the board, as you can tell. Which solution do you all want to the war, Vietnamization or coming home right now? No one ever mentions or thinks possible the possibility of victory. And this is what is happening in the field of health, unfortunately. We are not being asked whether you want socialized, state-controlled medicine or individualized, free enterprise medicine at all. We only have choice between the socialistic schemes. One of the senators was asked recently just what's going on in healthcare legislation in Washington with all these bills in the hopper. He says it's an auction. What he meant was the various politicians are trying to outbid each other with our tax dollars to give us a total scheme of health care. I hope you won't think that I'm picking on Wilbur Cohen by going back to him, but I'm going to start out with Wilbur Cohen, the former secretary of HEW. He has been the chief director of efforts to nationalize medical care in America in recent years. As most of you know, he helped to write the Social Security legislation, and he has been active in writing many medical bills since that time. He masterminded the Kerr-Mills law, which brought the federal government into medical care by way of the state governments. When he was manipulating this phase of nationalization of medicine, he at the same time was ingratiating himself to the Republican and the Democratic national legislators. It has been known for many years about his connection with communist front organizations and of his subversive record. It's well outlined in Marjorie Sharon's book, Wilbur Cohen, The Pursuit of Power. His record of working for collectivism and against individualism is certainly well known. From his position as Assistant Secretary of HEW, Mr. Cohen led the successful fight to establish the principle that it is legal for the federal government to pay medical and hospital expenses for everyone once they reach the age of 65, regardless of need or financial status. This legislation passed, of course, as you all know, in spite of the clear words of our Constitution to the contrary. Medicare became law, and we now have the botched-up system that you all have read about, and which Dr. Moorhead so beautifully outlined. The Medicaid provisions were simply an expansion of the Kerr-Mills legislation. The proponents of this legislation said at the time, if we can only break through and get our foot inside the door, we can expand the program after that. The socialists did get their foot in the door, and now they are planning to expand the program. Since Mr. Cohen is the chief architect and prime manipulator in all of this, and having left behind him in HEW an army of termites to undermine our system, we should examine the main proposals for this so-called national health insurance in the light of Mr. Cohen's standards. He laid down 10 principles for an acceptable program. Cohen's 10 Commandments. Let me give you the first one in his verbiage. I think this is interesting. Number 1 is breaking the barrier between paying for health care and eligibility for service. Now, doesn't that sound nice? This is an innocent appearing way of saying the United States system of paying for what you get is to be destroyed. And of course, this is the key to collectivism. By some miracle, everybody's going to have medical care and nobody's going to have to pay for it. His second point is to require the employer to pay part of the cost. And of course, this is another fooler. The employer can pay part of the cost only by passing that expense on to his customers. This big lie became popular with the Social Security law. His third point is that government is to contribute part of the cost. And who gives the money to the government? Point 4, eligibility for service is determined by federal rules, naturally. 5, subsidized group practice, salary, and capitation payments. This is the HMO, Health Maintenance Organization, that Dr. Moorhead mentioned. 6, subsidized training of more doctors, nurses, and ancillary personnel, and special emphasis on non-Caucasians and women. 7, use government leverage to increase consumer interference in health policy. 8, fix wages of doctors and emphasize group and social responsibility. In all areas, we must emphasize group and social responsibility. 9, permit the doctors, this is nice, permit the doctors to participate in preparing guidelines, standards, rules, regulations, forms, procedures. In other words, we get all the red tape and paperwork. 10, subsidize new systems of medical care. Those are Mr. Cohen's 10 commandments. Someone said if we give the politicians control over American medicine, this would be like appointing Jack the Ripper house mother over a sorority. I think he was right. All of the proposed plans, with the exception of the AMA Medicare Plan, incorporate the first 4 of these principles which Mr. Cohen laid down. The employer and the employee pay, the government participates in the payment, and the 4th, the government regulates the whole thing. So they are all different types of socialized medicine. Let's just take a little closer look at a few of the points in some of these. We'll first of all discuss a bit the labor bill, or the Cohen bill, which is also the Kennedy bill, S3, Griffiths, H.R. 22. This is the total package for socialized medicine now. Some of the programs are not quite that ambitious. This would be about like the socialized medicine that is going on in Britain, and which you'll hear more about shortly. Our friend from Massachusetts with his medicine show, perhaps it's been in your area, he has been stumping the country with it, has been making statements about medical care. One of them is that health care is the fastest growing failing business in the United States. And I was surprised to learn that when Mr. Kennedy said it. I thought that the federal government was the fastest growing failing business in the United States. He also said that our whole system fails to meet the urgent needs of our people. And again, I got confused. I thought he was talking about the government. These are just typical of the big lie technique that labor has used for years to ensnare America into a socialized medical scheme. Another statement that they're making is that America trails 12 other countries in infant mortality, and this is another big lie. They get the statistics for this from the World Health Organization statistics, and it says right in the charts that these statistics for various countries are not comparable. So the boys in HEW compare them. What would all of this cost? Well, Dr. Moorhead alluded to it. This total package of socialized medicine would come, it's really a very modest cost, according to Senator Kennedy, who's very accurate on these things, $41 billion. Now, that's not much, but the government actuaries say that it's going to be slightly more than that, and you know they're always very accurate. They say it's going to be $71 billion. But we don't believe this either, because based on the cost of Medicare and Medicaid, it's likely to cost for the package $100 billion right at the outset. That's per year. And as Dr. Moorhead said, that runs to about $2,000 per family per year, which is quite a medical bill. Back when, to give you an example, back when Medicare and Medicaid were started, they were put across as a modest package, and it was stated by the government that it would cost $2 billion a year. The government actuaries said later that no, it was a slight error there. It was actually closer to $5 billion. And of course, people in HEW got quite upset about this. Who do you think was correct, 2 or 5? Well, in 1970, Medicare and Medicaid came to $14 billion. So there again, they made a slight error. You all remember when LBJ made the statement that Medicare was going to cost $1 a month and would not be any drain at all on the Treasury? Recently in Columbus, Ohio, the Premier of Saskatchewan spoke, and he has been the head of a socialized state for some few years now, trying to unsocialize it. He gave a few statistics that were interesting. He said that since 1947, hospitalization costs in Saskatchewan have gone up per capita 8 to 10% per year. He explained that the point was reached where health costs were taking a full third of the total budget for the province, and thus endangered education, old age security, and other areas. He made another interesting statement. He said, there's only one trouble with socialism: it doesn't work. We might take just a brief look at the American Medical Association program called Medicredit. In this, the worker and the government share the costs. There is no employer payment provision. This is a voluntary comprehensive insurance program for those under 65. In other words, Medicare would continue, and the government would subsidize the cost anywhere from 10 to 100%. The Medicare Plan, which is supported by many good conservatives, unfortunately. I noticed John Ashbrook supported, and I wrote to him, and he said I oppose it, and told him why. And he said I just wasn't up on what was happening in the world, and I better get into the 20th century. But Medicredit is also a trap, just like the other programs. All of these programs, financed by the government, are going to lead to overutilization. And that's a term we use. It just means the overuse of the doctor's time and the hospitals. And I see this constantly, and I can do nothing about it under Medicare. When an individual is relieved of the responsibility for paying medical service, there is no restraint on his demands. As demands increase, costs, of course, rise. Taxes must increase to cover the costs. And in order to keep these costs down, the government puts on controls to a greater extent. The final result is the rationing of services. The Medicredit plan is similar to a Bowe bill, which was suggested in 1963, and the then Secretary of H.E.W. Celebres testified that this would naturally lead to more government controls because of the tremendous expenses, and that government would have to control the private insurance companies. I'm reminded of the fellow that went into the store, and he walked up to the counter, and he saw this beautiful little girl there with a miniskirt, and she came dancing up to him, and she says, what is your desire? And he took a long look at her, and he says, well, my desire is to come around that counter and sweep you up in my arms and hug you and kiss you, but I need a pair of socks. And I think somewhere along the line we're going to have to get our desires and our needs separated. Mr. Nixon has a plan, National Health Insurance Partnership. In his February 1971 health message, President Nixon said, we cannot be accused of having underfinanced our medical system, not by a long shot. We have, however, spent this money poorly, reinforcing inequities and rewarding inefficiencies and placing the burden of greater new demands on the same old system which cannot meet the old ones. In other words, he'd like to change the system too. He then promoted the HMOs, or the Health Maintenance Organization. And the health maintenance organizations have been priority one on the collectivist program since 1932. Let me show you how this HMO would work. In Columbus, where I live, we have a number of, matter of fact, a great number of small individually owned restaurants. And I won't be able to continue unless I have my notes. Thank you. These restaurants are, as I said, private, individually owned. They have sort of a non-system for the delivery of food care. And the restaurant business in Columbus is cottage industry, to use the current phrase for medicine, and is probably inefficient, costly, duplicating. So I'm proposing a new plan. I'd like all the small restaurants in Columbus, Ohio to close, and instead we'll have a federally financed food dispensary. Now, we'll call this the FPO, Food Providers Organization. And this FPO is going to keep everybody healthy. No more junk food. You're going to eat what you should have, a balanced diet. You're going to get your vitamins or else. And we're going to prevent illness. Food is going to drop in cost. Everybody's going to save money, and it's going to work out great. You're going to live longer. Now, isn't that wonderful? The only problem with HMOs or my plan for restaurants in Columbus is that in America we do have small businesses that not only survive but that thrive and do well. There are very few people that go to the socialist countries and look beneath the surface who do not beat a hasty retreat to America. Here we can choose for ourselves what we desire instead of meekly accepting goods and services rationed by the politicians. Our system has made us the envy of the world, yet there are many who would have us abandon it. Let me just briefly mention a few other systems. The Health Insurance Association of America also has a plan which incorporates the same socialistic schemes. They would create commissions in each state, and the payments to the doctors would be fixed. Then Senator Javits has a plan which meets all of the 10 provisions of Mr. Cohen. I'm sure you're not surprised at that. This plan was praised by an advocate of socialized medicine. She said that it is particularly ingenious, Senator Javits' plan. It combines a gradualistic approach with a not too distant timetable for full coverage in offering something to everybody and a minimum of offense to anyone. Mr. Cohen said, we could have a comprehensive national health plan to begin operations in 1976 when we commemorate the 200th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, unquote. And that's something we go from independence back to dependence. I think there's a timetable. We'll probably talk about this some more, but there's a timetable for the passage of all this. We feel that next year the Democrats will adopt a program something like the full Kennedy program, and the Republicans will be pushed by the Rip-Ons and other friends of ours as far out as possible to adopt as much of the full package as possible. They probably, as a matter of fact, will do the same thing the Democrats want to do, only it's going to cost less. Anyway, it will be a big debate in the campaign next fall, and whoever is elected is going to have a mandate, naturally, for national health insurance because all the people want it, and it will be enacted then in 73. Those who seek to destroy our system based on individualism are obviously pleased with the varied socialist schemes to impose national health insurance on the American public. You as patients and we as doctors should not collaborate with any of these schemes since they all can curtail our freedoms and lead to more and more controls. The end will be a total destruction of all individual freedom. During the Second World War, Joe Louis did some exhibition boxing for the troops. A reporter asked him, Joe, why is it that you're out doing this when you're not always well accepted in your home country? This simple man, this great fighter, looked back and he says, there ain't nothing wrong with America that Mr. Hitler can fix. And I think that perhaps the doctors ought to paraphrase this, and the public too, and say there may be defects in our medical field, but there ain't nothing wrong with American medicine that the politicians can fix. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Leithart. He has excellently pointed out that everybody has a plan to take over the practice of medicine. And all of these plans are rotten, but you are given a choice as to which one of these rotten plans you want. They all stink. I want none of them, and I will accept another one. I shall not accept any. I will and shall continue the practice of private medicine come hell or high water. I've just got to say a little something about this Medicare Plan. I have no intention of supporting any individual, any group, any organization, any association that does not support my philosophy. I'm convinced, I know that my yardsticks of right and wrong are a hell of a lot better than most of them that are trying to tell me what to do. I have no intention of following these. And when you follow a philosophy that from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs and or wants. That's Marxism. And if AMA promotes it, it still stinks as far as I'm concerned. Now, I'm a dues-paying member. There was a time when I paid a little money to the National Council of Churches. But after I learned what was going on, well, that didn't exist anymore. We keep hearing so much about money and the grants from the federal government. Well, the federal government is not a money-making body. The federal government can give you 9,972,000 methods of losing it or throwing it away or wasting it, but they can't give you 1 cent until it has first taken it from you, routed it through Washington, deducted handling charges, added 100% controls, and then flip it back to you and you think you're getting something for nothing. It's amazing. And when they try to tell me that we can measure our freedoms in terms of dollars and cents, it's nauseating.